Chicago, 1930. A city of 2 million people, and one man who owned all of them. The streets smelled like coal smoke and fear. Jazz leaked out of basement windows at 2 in the morning. Police officers looked the other way when certain black cars rolled past. Judges signed whatever papers were placed in front of them. And somewhere in the South Side, behind a door that looked like a wall, men with loaded pistols counted more money in a single night than most Americans would earn in a lifetime. This is not fiction. Every detail you're about to hear comes from FBI files, court records, Chicago Tribune archives, and first-hand testimonies of people who lived inside this world and somehow survived to talk about it. The question nobody ever really answers is, what was it actually like to live inside one of those hideouts? Not visit, not raid, live. What did you eat for breakfast? Who could you trust? What happened when someone broke the rules? And what did it feel like to sleep every night knowing that the men around you were capable of making you disappear before sunrise? That is exactly what this documentary is going to show you, reconstructed from real evidence, real testimonies, and real history. Stick with us because by the end of Chapter 4, you will never look at this era the same way again. To understand the hideout, you first have to understand the city. Chicago in 1930 was not just corrupt. It was systematically, structurally, professionally corrupt, in a way that had taken over a decade to build. The Volstead Act of 1919, which enforced prohibition across the United States, did not stop Americans from drinking. It simply handed the alcohol business to men who had no problem breaking the law. And in Chicago, the man who seized that business with both hands was Alphonse Gabriel Capone, Al Capone, better known on the streets as Scarface. According to the Chicago Crime Commission, an organization founded in 1919, specifically to track and combat organized crime, Capone's operation by 1930 was generating an estimated $60 million per year. Some FBI estimates put the number closer to $100 million in 1930 dollars. That is the equivalent of well over $1 billion today. That money came from bootleg liquor, gambling dens, prostitution rings, and protection rackets, and it had to go somewhere. It had to be stored, counted, moved, and protected, all in secret, all outside the reach of the law. That is where the hideouts came in. If you are discovering this channel for the first time, welcome. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell because we do real history, real reconstruction, and real facts that most people never get to see. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Chicago? New York? Los Angeles? Let us know. We read every single one. The hideouts of 1930s. Chicago were not the dark, dripping basements that Hollywood invented, according to John Kobler, whose 1971 biography Capone, The Life and World of Al Capone, remains one of the most rigorously researched accounts of this era. The real hideouts were deliberately designed to look like nothing from the outside and to feel like everything from the inside. One of the most documented locations associated with Capone's South Side operation was hidden behind the facade of a dry cleaning business on 22nd Street. From the sidewalk, a perfectly ordinary storefront, a sign, a counter, a bored-looking man reading a newspaper, nothing that would attract attention. But behind the back wall, which was not a wall at all, but a door reinforced with steel, was an entirely different world. Getting inside required knowing the right knock sequence, then passing a narrow hallway where two armed men stood in silence, studying your face, your hands, your eyes. Then entering a review room where you were patted down, every time. No exceptions. Even people who had been coming for years went through the same process every single visit, because in this world, trust was not permanent. It was renewed every single day. And the moment someone stopped trusting you, even for a second, your life could end before you reached the door. What was behind that door, the real interior of these hideouts, is what we reveal right now. Inside, luxury, paranoia, and the rules that kept you alive. Here is something that genuinely shocks people when they first encounter it in the historical record. The inside of Chicago's gangster hideouts in 1930 were beautiful. Not comfortable, not decent, beautiful. Police raid reports preserved in the Illinois State Archives, from raids conducted between 1928 and 1932, consistently describe interiors that contradicted everything the outside suggested. Persian rugs on hardwood floors, hand-carved wooden furniture, gold-framed mirrors on every wall, automatic player pianos, full bars stocked with Canadian whiskey, French wine, and Cuban rum. All of it illegal, none of it hidden. Silk curtains, leather chairs, artwork on the walls. In 1930, while the Great Depression was forcing families to sell their furniture just to eat, the men inside these rooms were eating steak for dinner and playing poker with $100 bills. This was not accidental. This was a statement. In the culture that governed these organizations, according to criminologist Humbert Nelly in his landmark work, The Business of Crime, 1976, displays of wealth inside the organization were a fundamental tool of authority. Luxury said, "The law cannot touch us. The government cannot stop us. We exist above all of it." And for a time, a terrifying, documented, historically verified time, that was completely true. But underneath the silk curtains and the whiskey and the leather chairs lived something else entirely, something that no amount of luxury could cover up. Paranoia. Pure, constant, suffocating paranoia. William Rooney, a Chicago Police Department detective who worked organized crime cases throughout the 1930s and whose testimony was preserved through the Chicago History Museum's oral history collection, described it this way in his recorded interviews. These men trusted nobody, not their cousins, not their oldest friends. We found cases, documented cases, where a man was killed because he laughed at the wrong moment, because someone thought his laugh sounded like he knew something. The internal rules of these hideouts were never written down. They did not need to be. Everyone who entered already knew them, because they had watched what happened to people who broke them. Rule 1. You do not speak about what happens inside to anyone outside. Not your wife, not your priest, not your lawyer. The penalty for breaking this rule was not a fine or a warning. It was death. This is documented in FBI surveillance reports from the early 1930s, where informants consistently described the organization's response to leaks as immediate and lethal. Rule 2. You do not bring anyone inside unless the boss personally approves it. Not a friend, not a relative, not someone you have known your whole life. One unapproved visitor could compromise the entire operation, and the person who brought them in would be held personally responsible for everything that followed. Rule 3. You do not question orders. You receive them, you execute them, and you come back and report. That is all. Are you still with us? Because what we are about to get into, the daily life, the food, the sleep schedules, the violence that erupted without warning inside these walls, is something that has almost never been documented in this kind of detail. Make sure you are subscribed. And tell us in the comments, did you know any of this? Does this match what you thought you knew about this era? The men who lived inside these hideouts not just visited, but actually lived there for days or weeks at a time, existed in a state of suspended reality. They woke up typically between 9 and 10 in the morning. Breakfast was brought in from outside, usually from a restaurant or diner that the organization controlled or owned. Eggs, bread, coffee, sometimes meat. Simple food served by someone who knew better than to make eye contact. The mornings were for counting, money from the previous night's operations, gambling receipts, bootleg alcohol payments, protection money collected from businesses across the city was brought in, sorted, and logged. Not in official ledgers, in coded notebooks that made no sense unless you knew the system. These notebooks, when occasionally seized in raids, baffled police for weeks. Some were never fully decoded. The afternoons were for meetings, short ones. Nobody sat in a room longer than necessary. Information was shared on a strict need-to-know basis. According to the FBI's own internal memos from 1930 and 1931, declassified decades later and available through the National Archives, the organization's operational security was, in the FBI's own words, remarkably sophisticated for a criminal enterprise of this scale. They were not disorganized criminals. They were a corporation, with hierarchy, with protocols, with communication systems, and with consequences for failure that no legitimate corporation could ever enforce. Guns, gold, and the economics of fear. Let us talk about the weapons, because no account of life inside a Chicago gangster hideout in 1930 is complete without understanding exactly what kind of firepower these men kept within arm's reach at all times. The Thompson submachine gun, the Tommy gun, was not just an icon of the era. It was standard equipment. According to firearms historian William Helmer, whose research into the weapons of the Prohibition era produced the definitive account, The Gun That Made the '20s Roar, 1969, the Thompson was chosen specifically because it was devastating in enclosed spaces, in a narrow corridor, in a stairwell, in the back room of a hideout. 20 rounds in 2 seconds. Nobody was getting up from that. But the Tommy gun was not the only weapon. Police raid inventories from seized hideouts, preserved in Cook County court records, consistently showed the same arsenal. Thompson submachine guns, sawed-off shotguns, .38 and .45 caliber revolvers, and in several cases, military-grade hand grenades. Hand grenades, inside buildings in the middle of a major American city. These were not men preparing for crime. These were men preparing for war. And the gold. Let us talk about the gold. Cash was dangerous to hold in large quantities. Banks could not be fully trusted, not because they were honest, but because federal agents could subpoena records. So portions of the organization's wealth were converted into physical assets. Gold coins, gold bars, jewelry, diamonds. Herbert Asbury, the journalist and historian whose 1940 book, The Gem of the Prairie, An Informal History of the Chicago Underworld, drew on years of direct reporting from the city, documented accounts from former members of criminal organizations who described storage systems that would seem almost absurd if they were not completely real. False floors under rugs, hollow walls behind panels, safes welded directly into concrete and then covered with plaster so that even the safe's door was invisible until you knew exactly where to press. One raid in 1931, covered extensively by the Chicago Tribune on March 14th of that year, uncovered a false wall in a South Side property that concealed not just cash, but gold coins totaling an estimated value of $40,000 in 1931. That is the equivalent of over $700,000 today, hidden behind a wall that looked like every other wall in the building. This is real history. This is documented. And we want to know what you think about it. Leave a comment right now. Does this change how you see this era? Were you taught any of this in school? Share this video with someone who loves American history, because this is the part of history that the textbooks left out. Now let us talk about something that almost no documentary touches: the economics of fear inside the hideout itself. Every person inside that building had a price, not just a salary, a value, and everyone knew it. The gunmen who guarded the doors were paid well, better than most factory workers could dream of during the Depression. According to court testimony from the 1931 tax evasion trial of Al Capone, one of the most document-rich legal proceedings of the entire Prohibition era, lower-level operatives were earning between $75 and $100 per week. In an era when the average American worker earned approximately $17 per week, that was an almost incomprehensible amount of money. But that money came with a cost that no paycheck could compensate for. The men who took those salaries could not leave. Not really. They could walk out the door, but they could never actually leave the organization. Former FBI agent William Romer, who spent decades studying and pursuing organized crime figures and documented his findings in Romer, Man Against the Mob, 1989, described this dynamic clearly. Once you were inside, the only exits were death, prison, or disappearance, and disappearance usually led to one of the first two. This was the economy of the hideout. You traded your freedom, your real freedom, not just your physical movement, for money, protection, and status. And every morning you woke up inside those walls, you renewed that trade, whether you wanted to or not. The violence that enforced this economy was not random. It was deliberate, calculated, and strategic. It happened when it needed to happen to send a message. And the message was always the same: there is no way out. The end of the hideout, what history really tells us. By 1931, the world that had built those hideouts was beginning to crack. Not because law enforcement had suddenly become more effective, not because the public had turned against the gangsters. In many neighborhoods, Capone was genuinely popular, known for running soup kitchens during the Depression and keeping order on streets where the police had long since given up. The cracks came from something far more mundane, far more bureaucratic, and in its own way, far more devastating than any police raid could ever be. Federal taxes. The United States government, unable to convict Al Capone on bootlegging, murder, or any of the violent crimes that defined his organization, went after him for something he and his lawyers genuinely had not taken seriously: income tax evasion. The IRS investigation, led by Special Agent Frank Wilson, whose meticulous work has been documented in detail by historian Deirdre Bair and in Wilson's own memoir preserved at the National Archives, traced cash flows through the organization's network of businesses and identified income that Capone had never declared. The amount was not even that large by the standards of what his organization handled, but it was provable, and that was all they needed. On October 17, 1931, Al Capone was convicted on 5 counts of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The verdict sent shockwaves through every hideout, every backroom, every false-walled safe house in Chicago. If they could get Capone, the most powerful, most protected, most feared man in the city, they could get anyone. But here is what the history books often miss. The hideouts did not disappear when Capone went to prison. The organization restructured. New men stepped in. The buildings were abandoned and new ones were found. The code notebooks were burned and new codes were created. The infrastructure of fear that had been built over more than a decade did not collapse with one conviction. It adapted. According to the Chicago Crime Commission's annual reports from 1932 and 1933, documents that are available to the public but rarely cited in popular accounts of this era, organized crime activity in Chicago actually continued at nearly the same level throughout 1932, even with Capone behind bars. The machine was bigger than any one man. It had always been bigger than any one man. What the hideouts of 1930 represent in the historical record is not just crime. They represent a complete parallel society, with its own economy, its own laws, its own justice system, and its own version of loyalty. A society that existed inside the walls of ordinary-looking buildings in an ordinary-looking American city. And that operated for years with a level of efficiency and discipline that rivaled legitimate institutions. Before we wrap up, if you have made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Subscribe right now if you have not already. Share this video with one person who you know loves real American history, and drop a comment telling us what surprised you most. What do you wish you had been taught about this era? We read every comment, every single one. Here is what we know for certain. based on everything the historical record has given us. The men who lived inside those hideouts in Chicago in 1930 were not cartoon villains. They were human beings operating inside a system that rewarded ruthlessness and punished hesitation. They ate real food. They had real fears. They loved real people and put those people in danger simply by being who they were. The hideout was not just a physical place, it was a psychological state, a way of existing that required you to be permanently alert, permanently suspicious, and permanently aware that the life you were living could end at any moment, from outside the organization or from within it. The Persian rugs and the gold-framed mirrors and the Canadian whiskey were not signs of success. They were compensation, a way of making the cage feel like a palace. And in Chicago in 1930, for thousands of men across hundreds of operations, that cage was the only world they knew. This is the real history of life inside a gangster hideout. Not glamorized, not simplified, exactly as the documents, the testimonies, and the surviving records show it to be.